To meet the qualifying child joint return test, the child can't file a joint return for the year, unless the married child and their spouse file a joint return only to claim a tax refund of income tax withheld or estimated tax paid. What if a child is married but using the married filing separately filing status? Would they pass this test? Yes, the test specifically states they can't file a joint return. Therefore, they can pass this test if they file married filing separately. There is one more consideration before the potential dependent can be considered a qualifying child for the client: the tiebreaker rules. A qualifying child has additional special rules for determining who may claim the child as a qualifying child dependent. There will be times a potential dependent could be a qualifying child of more than one taxpayer. For example, a child could be a potential dependent of both their parents and grandparents if they all live together for more than 6 months, and the child could meet the tests to be a qualifying child for each of them. The tiebreaker rules are followed when determining who will ultimately get the qualifying child dependency. On the definition of a dependent reference, these rules fall into number 9, special case. These special rules are also referred to as the tiebreaker rules. If the IRS has to decide who gets to claim the qualifying child, they use this specific set of rules. We will cover these tiebreaker rules thoroughly in the dependent related filing statuses chapter. Let's test what we've learned so far with our next check for understanding question. Which scenario would pass the qualifying child relationship test? The first person, named as the potential dependent. Anne is Janet's 5-year-old cousin. Jan is Meredith's 10-year-old neighbor. She was placed in Meredith's care by the family court system. Kevin is Wayne's uncle, or Bridget is Marco's fiance's daughter. Marco is raising Bridget as his daughter. Pause to think about it, then resume when you're ready for the answer. If you answered B, you are on fire. That is correct. A foster child is one of the required relationships. Jan was placed in Meredith's care by the family court system and is Meredith's foster child for purposes of the qualifying child requirements. Let's walk through the other answers as well for a full understanding. Anne is Janet's 5-year-old cousin. This is incorrect. A cousin is not one of the required relationships for a qualifying child. Kevin is Wayne's uncle. This is incorrect. An uncle is not one of the required relationship for a qualifying child. Bridget is Marco's fiance's daughter. Marco is raising Bridget as his daughter. This is incorrect. Marco is not Bridget's father or stepfather. She is also not his foster child. Until Marco and his fiancée get married, he will not be able to claim Bridget as a qualifying child. Let's work through a few potential dependents next. With the next few scenarios that we'll look at, you may want to pause the video as the scenarios change so you can take time to read through the information on the screen. Or you may not. You decide, I'm not the boss of you. Normally, I would instruct you to not make any assumptions, but what one requirement is not specifically represented in the scenario. If Mandy is filing a joint return, it is safe to say that at 6 years old, she is not married and therefore would not be filing a joint return. Now, is Mandy a qualifying child of her parents? Mandy is a qualifying child of her parents because she meets tests 1 through 8. Now we'll consider Gretchen. Does Gretchen pass the residency test? No, she did not live with her mother more than half the year. January 1st through June 13th is only 5.5 months. Would she be a qualifying child of her father? Yes, she would pass all the requirements to be her father's qualifying child dependent, including residency, if her father himself is not a dependent of another person. After failing test 6, is there any reason to continue determining if she passed tests 7 or 8? No. Once the 6th test was failed, there is no reason to move on to tests 7 or 8. She is not a qualifying child dependent of Miriam, regardless of whether she passed those last 2 tests. Gretchen is not a qualifying child of Miriam because she failed the residency test. Luther is next. Is the first test passed? No. Luther's mother Pamela is a dependent of Anna, so Pamela cannot have a dependent herself. Do we need to go any further for Pamela and Luther? No. Since the first test was failed, Luther cannot be Pamela's dependent. Could Luther be a qualifying child of Anna? Yes, he would pass all of the requirements. He is her nephew, which meets the relationship test. He is under age 19, lived with her more than half the year, did not provide over half of his own support, and is not filing a joint return. He is Anna's qualifying child. Dependent. Luther is not a qualifying child of Pamela because the first test was failed. Here is where we need to stress the importance of the taxpayer interview. During the tax interview, would you automatically have known Pamela was a dependent of Anna? The only way the tax professional would know is by asking questions. Often, taxpayers do not know or understand tax law and rely on us to ask questions and make sure we are preparing accurate tax returns. What if Pamela wanted to claim Luther so she could get a credit based on the small amount of income she had from working the first part of January? Pamela tells you Anna already said she would not claim Pamela and that Pamela could claim Luther. Could Pamela then claim Luther? No, it is not a choice. If someone qualifies as a dependent, whether or not they are claimed, does not change the fact that they are a dependent of someone else. Furthermore, if someone does not qualify as a dependent, there is no option to claim them. Our last scenario is about Eric. Did Eric pass the age test? Yes, he was under the age of 24 and a full-time student. Did Eric pass the residency test? Yes. First, he lived at home more than half the year. Second, his time away at school was a temporary absence since he was coming home during breaks. Did Eric pass the support test if he had $4,500 in earnings and a $15,000 scholarship? Remember from reading in the participant's guide, his scholarship is not counted towards his support since he is the taxpayer's son and is a full-time student. Eric is a qualifying child of his parents because he meets tests 1 through 8. Now that we've worked through a few scenarios, let's answer our next check for understanding question. Sam, who is age 23, is single. He attended classes full-time for 5 months and worked for the rest of 2024. He is Fred's son and lived with Fred all year. What qualifying child test still needs to be passed? Relationship, age, residency, or support? Pause and get a glass of water. You know you need one. Hydration is so important. Resume when you are ready for the answer. If you said D, support, you have now found the boom to your bada bing. If Sam worked full-time, he could have potentially provided over 1/2 of his own support. He also may have lived off his own savings account. It would have to be established that Sam did not provide more than half of his own support. Let's see why the rest of these answers are incorrect. Relationship is incorrect. Sam is Fred's son, so he passes the relationship test. Age is incorrect. Sam is 23 and a full-time student for at least 5 months, so he passes the age test. Residency is incorrect. Sam lived with Fred more than 6 months, so he passed the residency test. You should be really proud of yourself. Before we move on to a qualifying relative, we are going to spend some time on what support is and how you compute support. What is support? Support includes all the items necessary for a dependent's care, as well as luxuries and items used purely for personal enjoyment. Who provides a potential dependence? Support will help determine if they are a qualifying child or qualifying relative dependent. If you need help determining support, use IRS Publication 17, Worksheet 3-1, located on page 31 of the publication. Support does include certain items and does not include certain other items. We will concentrate on what is included in support. When determining lodging, be sure to use the value of the lodging and not the actual cost. So if the taxpayer owns the house and pays a mortgage, use the fair market rental value and not the amount of the mortgage paid. Look at the determining support section of the qualifying dependents and support chapter in your participant's guide. What items are considered support? Pause here to think about it and maybe do some jumping jacks. Resume when you're ready. Here are the items that are considered food, lodging, or housing. Don't forget that when determining lodging, be sure to use the value of the lodging and not the actual cost. So if the taxpayer owns the house and pays a mortgage, use the fair market rental value and not the amount of the mortgage paid. Clothing, grooming, and personal care items. Most unreimbursed medical and dental expenses, including health insurance premiums. Most education expenses, including tuition, books, supplies, room and board, and meals consumed at school. Child and dependent care, such as daycare, transportation, recreational activities. Capital items, such as a car, computer, stereo, or television, purchased for the dependent's individual use. Great work here. It is now time for our 5th check for understanding question. Which of the following is included in support? Life insurance premiums, furniture for general household use, clothing, Medicare taxes paid from dependents' wages. Pause and resume when you're ready or go grab a snack. If you said C, clothing, you are solid gold. Amount spent on clothing is included in support of a dependent. Let's find out why these other responses are incorrect. Life insurance premiums is incorrect. Life insurance premiums are specifically excluded from support of a dependent, as are funeral expenses. Furniture for general household use is incorrect. Items purchased for general household use cannot be used in computing support for a dependent, but the availability of these items is considered when determining the fair rental value of the housing. Medicare taxes paid from dependents' wages is incorrect. Social Security and Medicare taxes paid from a dependent's wages are not counted for support. This is not to be confused with Medicare premiums paid for health insurance, which are counted as support. You are a baddie. Never forget that. Remember Gerald? We can look at his support next. On the qualified relative page of the participant's guide, there is an example of computing total support. Gerald is 69 years old and lives with his son and daughter-in-law. Gerald provided some of his own support, and his son and daughter-in-law also provided some of his support. You can see here how we calculated the amount on line 2. Lines 6 through 12 are necessary to compute the line 13 amount of the potential dependent's share of household expenses. Lines 13 through 18 are used to compile all amounts spent on the potential dependents. Support, whether paid by the potential dependent, the taxpayer, or any other individuals. The amount of support paid by the potential dependent from line 2 is included in lines 14 through 18. Gerald's support worksheet is reviewed in the chapter video review 2 if you want a more in-depth discussion of the example. Our next stop takes us to the differences between a qualifying child and a qualifying relative.